I trod the lonely paths of yesteryear one Sunday afternoon amid tall trees that stood beside a creek, now sadly choked with heavy brush-strewn grasses and dry leaves, spanned yet by a forgotten covered bridge. No more do dreamy lovers, hand in hand, or buggy riders stoop to share a kiss, seek privacy within its sheltered depths, still echoing the laughter or the tears of yet another age, another time blown windward like the seed of dandelion. That's a beautiful poem that was written in 1972 by Miriam Woolfolk, a Kentucky lady who provokes a great deal of nostalgia as she talks about the bridges that spanned our creeks across the Commonwealth for years and years. Our program today deals with Kentucky's covered bridges. My name is Philip Conn. I'm your host for this series, and I want to wish you a welcome to our Appalachia. We will talk during this series and during this particular program with a lot of Fleming County folks, and one in particular, Stock Bowers, helped to build and maintain bridges for a long time in northeastern Kentucky. So join us as we talk about these monuments to a day gone by. The Ringo's Mill Bridge crosses Fox Creek near Kentucky 158. This bridge was built in 1867 and is 86 feet long. It was actually constructed to serve a grist mill. The bridge was built of giant white pine beams with a siding of now unattainable 20-inch wide yellow poplar beams. These materials were used because they would withstand lengthy exposure as long as they were kept dry. That's why, of course, covered bridges were covered, so that the water would be kept off of all of these major beams that sustain the bridge, and also to protect the bridge floor from the elements. Goddard Bridge is also known as the White Bridge. It's actually one of the oldest bridges in the state and may have been built as early as 1837. Goddard Bridge crosses Sand Lick Run just off of Kentucky 32 at Goddard, Kentucky. This is 9 miles east of Flemingsburg in Fleming County, Kentucky. This bridge was actually dismantled when the highway was built in 1933 and moved to its present site by the WPA. Stock Bauer says that this bridge used to be longer before it was moved, but that the ends of the bridges tend to rot off, and the people oftentimes would just saw off the bridges and then rebuild them with what timber was left. This probably happened to this bridge at Goddard. This is the only bridge now in Kentucky held together by wooden pegs and is 84 feet long. The bridge has lattice-type construction and was restored in 1968 by the Fleming Fiscal Court. Stockbauer supervised this renovation. On February 2nd, 1981, a local man started a fire on 2 of the crossbeams inside the bridge at about the midsection. The resulting fire seriously threatened the bridge and ultimately cost $1,000 in damage. One special feature you'll notice of this bridge is the charming white church. It's a United Methodist church that is in the distance and is actually framed by the bridge opening. The church also burned in 1981. The church was completely destroyed, but since that time it has been reproduced in pretty much its original appearance. The Hillsborough Bridge takes its name from Hillsborough, Kentucky. It's also known as the Granger Bridge. 3 miles south of Hillsborough on Kentucky 111 in Fleming County, this covered bridge spans Fox Creek. Built about 1865, this 84-foot structure is now covered with sheet metal, which is weathered to a soft, rusty hue. The old bridge builders developed their own style of building bridges and patented the designs. Others could build their bridges using their designs, but they had to pay a royalty, about $1 per lineal foot of the completed bridge. The Hillsborough Bridge is a good example of what's called the Burr Truss. Theodore Burr was a noted builder in Pennsylvania who patented this particular method. The bridge style employs multiple king posts. The yellow pine timbers have double-shouldered braces. Abutments are of what is called red stone in the area. The Hillsborough Bridge was closed to traffic in 1969 when an adjacent concrete structure was built. That concrete structure cost about $357,000, and you can rest assured that's considerably more than the original Hillsborough covered bridge cost? You know, a lot of people ask, why a covered bridge? Some people actually believe that covered bridges were developed because they're picturesque. Well, there were far more practical reasons back when covered bridges were developed in the early part of this nation's development. The main reason bridges are covered is to protect the wooden timbers which make up the bridge structure. Way before the days of reinforced concrete and before the days of steel beams, you had to keep wood dry if you wanted to last a long time. So the covering actually protected the floor of the bridge and the sides from water so that decay was not as common. There were several different woods that were used for covered bridges. There were pine logs that were hewn for major beams. There were chestnuts back before the blight killed them out. But I guess the most popular wood used for covered bridge beams was the yellow poplar. Now, there are a lot of reasons that the yellow poplar was common. As those of you who work wood realize, poplar is very easy to work. It's easy to chisel. It's easy to carve out into the desired shape. Also, poplar will last a long, long time if it's protected from the elements. Poplar will decay, of course, if water gets to it. Another thing about poplar, it's very resilient. It can take a whole lot of up and down without cracking, and it also resists termites. And anytime you're working with wood, you have to be well aware of the damage that termites can do. One of the early bridge builders in Kentucky was a German named Louis Wernag. He built bridges right up almost to the Civil War, and he died at that time. I guess his masterpiece was a large span that went across the Kentucky River at Camp Nelson. It actually reached from bank to bank across the Kentucky River without any support whatsoever in the middle. Now, of course, there were some other reasons for covered bridges. It was often said by old-timers that the one sure thing, you could coach a horse through a covered bridge when you couldn't get him to go across an uncovered span. The reason, very simply, is because a horse going into a covered bridge doesn't feel that he's crossing a river. He might think he's going into a barn or some other secluded area. So evidently horses weren't spooked by creeks so long as a covered bridge spanned the creek. Of course, covered bridges kept many heads dry during bad weather, and they were actually used as places for friends together, for community affairs. I've even heard of cases where couples were married under covered bridges. Seems that way back when it was kind of hard to get a justice of the peace or a judge to perform a wedding, that folks would contact a peace officer in the county seat, and the peace officer would meet the individuals at a specified covered bridge, and there the ceremony would take place. I'd say there's some old-timers that could point out a covered bridge as a place where the wedding vows were exchanged. That brings up the whole notion of the kissing bridge. A lot of people talk about covered bridges as kissing bridges. And the reason for that should be obvious, because as a young fellow was dashing along the countryside with his true love, it was best to duck into a covered bridge if you wanted to get a little kiss or if you wanted to hug up real tight. So it was often joked that if a fellow went through one end of a covered bridge, you couldn't necessarily anticipate when he would come out the other end if he had a good-looking girl in tow in his buggy. Of course, the bridges in Kentucky have gone one by one. At one time, there were over 300 spanning the creeks and the rivers and the streams of our state. From the very beginning, it seems that many of the covered bridges were in central and eastern Kentucky, largely because that's where the streams were. And certainly today, we find that the remaining covered bridges, and there are only 15 in Kentucky, are in the central and northeastern part of the state. You know, it was viewed as unfortunate that northeastern Kentucky couldn't have all of its covered bridges replaced by concrete and steel many years ago, but now we realize that we're fortunate, that we're really lucky to have the covered bridges that remain around us. The one thing that is critical is that these bridges be maintained, and with the tight squeeze on money, fiscal courts, of course, have great difficulty in coming up with the money they need for repairs and for other means of maintaining bridges. During the 1982 Appalachian celebration at Morehead State University, we were fortunate in being able to talk to one of the old-time covered bridge builders in Kentucky, Stock Bauer. Stock Bauer has actually built, along with his father, a number of bridges in eastern Kentucky. He's helped to repair a lot of bridges and now is a strong advocate for maintaining those covered bridges that we have remaining. Let's listen to some of what Stock Bauer has to say about the importance of covered bridges in eastern Kentucky and the need to keep them as reminders of a glorious past. We're very pleased to have with us Mr. Stock Bauer, who is from Fleming County and is the noted authority throughout this area on covered bridges. Mr. Bauer, it's really great to have you here at the Morehead State University campus.
Well, it's an honor to be here.
I've been able to admire some of your handiwork up close as I've admired the covered bridges in Fleming County. And I understand that you came by bridge building as a third-generation bridge builder. Tell us a little bit about your father and your grandfather before you.
My grandfather was born in Maryland in 1819. And he went to school there, and he took up bridge building as a bridge builder's apprentice. And as soon as he thought he was had enough experience, why he went into a business of his own. He went to build bridges of his own. And he bridged his way from Maryland to central Ohio, and then crossed the Ohio River and went as far south as Bourbon County, Kentucky, in which he built several bridges. And he built bridges in Kentucky, in Lewis, Mason, Fleming, Bracken, and Bourbon that I know of.
So northeastern Kentucky was a big area for him in building bridges.
It was.
Now that was your grandfather.
That was my grandfather. And my father, as soon as he was old enough to work, why, my grandfather took him under his wing, and he and his brother, my dad's brother, Ike Bauer, Ike for short.
Right.
And they both grew up under their father, Jacob N. Bauer. And both of them followed bridge building as long as they were able. And Dad took me on my first bridge job in 1920.
I see.
I was 15 years old, and it was over in Ohio.
Ohio was your first job.
It was my first job, yes. And from there we went, well, Virginia, state of Virginia, Indiana, and all through central and southern Ohio. And I helped him on some bridges in Kentucky, most of which are gone now, because Kentucky has made a point of destroying every covered bridge that they had the least excuse.
Well, a lot of
some
us,
without any excuse.
A lot of us find that a real shame, because building covered bridges requires a tremendous amount of skill, and I guess the way you're describing it, it was a true apprenticeship type trade. In other words, you learned it from a fellow builder.
Way.
Right. And was it common for bridge building to follow in family lines? Were there other bridge builders who learned?
Yes. The Kennedy family in Indiana was founded by Mr. Emmett Kennedy along about the middle of the 19th century. And he and his brothers and their sons did some wonderful bridge work in Ohio. And the last bridge that the Kennedys built over there was known as Kennedy's Masterpiece.
I see.
And we restored that bridge in the year of 1926 near Connersville. And it was a masterpiece.
Right.
And I have a beautiful photograph of it. And we were there about 5 months and restored traffic to it. Now, this Goddard Bridge here...
Let's look at some of these models.
This Goddard Bridge here is what they call a town lattice. This bridge was designed by Ithiel, capital I-T-H-I-E-L, capital T-O-W-N, in the year 1820.
I see. Now, when you say developed, he actually made a design, and then was that available to various builders, or?
It was available to various builders, providing they paid him $1 per lineal foot
I'll be.
to take the pattern off of one of these bridges and try to build one.
He actually had a patent on it?
He had a patent on it.
So you had to buy the rights to use that design?
Yes, and the going rate was $1 per lineal foot. That bridge 63 feet long. If somebody wanted to copy that bridge, they owed Mr. Town $63.
I'll be. That's interesting. Now, this is a replica of the Goddard Bridge that is currently standing in Fleming County, Kentucky.
Right.
And of course, we're very fortunate in this area in that Fleming County, I guess, has more covered bridges remaining than any other county in Kentucky. Is that correct?
Right.
And it was unfortunate that one of our bridges was destroyed recently. Tell us a little bit about that bridge.
The Sherman Bridge. By far the outstanding coverage bridge left in the state of Kentucky. I knew it well, from one end to the other.
Right.
It was composed of two unequal spans. And was across the Licking River at Sherman. It's 263 feet long. That is floor length. Now the roof length's been much longer.
Right, because of the overhangs.
Overhang.
Let me ask you a very basic question, but I'm kind of a novice when it comes to covered bridges. What is the explanation for going with a covered bridge, in other words, a roof, as opposed to just an open bridge?
An open bridge of any type, if it's built of timber, wouldn't last much longer than the time it took to leave the site. 10 years at the most. Just
rot out from water?
Yes. The covered bridge is covered for one and one reason only, and that's to protect the supporting timbers.
Right. So once we left wooden structures, the notion of having a bridge covered, began to disappear. But evidently, these things are built so well that they have as long a lifespan as, say, a concrete bridge.
There's some of these covered bridges standing in Europe that are 600 years old. They know of, and some are even older than that. People that have seen them that have toured Europe, have seen these covered bridges and have written to me and told me about them. Especially Switzerland and Germany, two of the countries that I've heard from.
And they tend to preserve their covered bridges.
Oh, they do. If they didn't, they wouldn't last 500 or 600 years, and some of them are still in use.
Right. Now, I understand that in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, that the preservation of covered bridges has had a bit of a shot in the arm here lately. Could you tell us about that?
I certainly can. In my 60-odd years of reconstruction and restoration of covered bridges, Governor John Young Brown Jr. is the only governor that showed one iota of interest in the covered bridges of Kentucky. And he has appointed what is called a Kentucky Covered Bridge Authority.
Right.
It's composed of 5 members. Want me to name them?
Might as well, for 5.
Dr. Campbell of Flemingsburg, Mr. John Clee of the Maysville Community College, Mr. Ralph Sims of Robertson County, Mrs. Nick Clooney of Augusta, Bryan County, and myself.
So here again, we're pretty much in the northeastern section of the state, in the area where most of the covered bridges remain.
Yes.
So it's a well-appointed group.
Now this, Bourbon County has one. My dad's name is in it. The date is 1913. And I rebuilt that bridge again in 1973.
I see. Is that your most recent restoration?
No. My most recent restoration is in Ohio. That's where I've done most of my work and where my dad did most of his.
Right.
Now, last account I had, which was 2 years ago, I had 135 covered bridges.
I'll be. So they have
and
far
some of them are large. Most of them are large bridges. And the last one I did over there was 5 years ago. It's 176 feet, single span. My dad restored that same bridge in the year 1932.
Right.
And they thought it needed some attention in 76. I went over there in September of 76 and worked all during that horrible winter of 76 and 7. And some mornings we went to work, it was 22 below zero.
Wow, right. Been hard to work with concrete at that temperature. Let me ask you, how many old-time bridge builders, I'm talking about folks who have learned it in the traditional way, would you say remain in the United States?
I don't know about the United States, but they have some good bridge men in Indiana. Now, Indiana has over 100, and they're taking care of them. They're proud of them. Pennsylvania has over 100. Now, there's some good bridge builders in Indiana, Ohio,
who maintain those
and
bridges.
Pennsylvania. They know what they're doing.
Right. You're actually suggesting then that Kentucky has not taken as much care with its covered bridges over the years
Kentucky
as other
hasn't taken
states.
any.
Well, that's very lamentable, because they are a very important part of our tradition, both as a historical monument and because of the skill and workmanship that goes into them. Let me ask you, talking about the skill and workmanship, tell us what this bridge is, and then why don't you give us some of the various portions of the bridge and give us basic idea of how you set a bridge like this up.
That's easy. This is a Howe truss, capital H-O-W-E. It was designed and patented by a bridge man by the name of William Howe in the year 1840. And there are worlds of them standing today. Kentucky has, right offhand, I can think of two. That's the Franklin County Bridge and one in Lawrence County, known as the Blaine Creek Bridge.
So it's been a very popular design.
Very popular design.
And I guess folks might be able to see that it's a double lane bridge.
This one is.
Okay.
But this is modeled after an Ohio bridge. It was built in 1829. This bridge is, the real bridge is 153 years old, and they use it 365 days out of the year.
Still in operation.
Still in operation. I was over there in 1979 when they celebrated its 150th anniversary. And thousands of people came and went.
Right.
There's a state park right near it, and all the visitors were supposed to sign the book, you know.
Right. Tell me very briefly how you would set up a bridge like this on its piers. In other words, how much of this is solid timber and how much is pieced together?
These diagonals are all solid timber. Now, the lower cord, which is this right here, runs all the way from abutment to abutment. There's no tree that they could get it solid timbers out of. Same for the upper cord, which you can't see on account of the roof. Built the same way that the lower cord is. So they had to splice. And at each one of those splices is what they call a combination key. Now, I cannot describe a combination key so it would make sense.
It's very unique to bridge building, then, I take it.
I have built by hand, I have made by hand several combination keys. But there's no use trying to describe how it's done.
Right.
But they hold the joints together. Wherever there's a splice, there's a combination key.
Right.
Keep that joint from spreading.
Right. Are they held together basically, though, with metal, with bolts, or some other type of joint?
Wherever you put in a combination key, there has to be, at least 8 bolts to press it tight.
Right.
Because if it wasn't in there tight, it would be useless. No use to have it.
What are the most common culprits or things that do damage to covered bridges?
You know, the greatest enemy that the covered bridges got?
What's that?
Man himself.
I'll be. By virtue of vandalism or by virtue of just doing away with them unnecessarily?
Just doing away, neglect.
Right.
To leave the roofs off, to leave the siding boards off. In that way, they're exposed to the elements, which timber will stand only so many years.
Right.
If it isn't
it's
protected.
Exposed, right.
Now, most of these bridges are built out of yellow pine or yellow pop. I ran into one across the Little Muskingum River in the eastern part of Ohio. It was oak.
That was a heavy wood to work with.
I didn't know it.
Right.
And I took the job, not knowing it was built out of oak.
Right.
And we had to bore holes for every spike.
Seasoned oak is mean
wood.
wood.
It was hard as flint, and the only thing we did was bend nails. Spike after spike we bent. finally we had to bore holes for every spike we drove.
Right.
And that was time consuming.
Right, you bet. Well, Mr. Bauer, this has been a fascinating discussion. We're so delighted to have you here displaying these models. And I'm eager to get with you in Fleming County and see some of these bridges on site. I know several of them, and we certainly do admire the work you've done with bridges over the years.
Well, I can take you to any of them, explain the thing to you. Now, this, that type of bridge right there is known as the Burr Truss, kept a B-U-R-R.
Mm-hmm.
And that was designed and invented by Theodore Burr in the year 1812. Now,
Right.
that's as far back as history goes on the covered bridges of the United States.
Right. Right.
He was from one of the New England states, and there's one. That Burr Truss is very popular, and it's all over. All the states that have any bridges have a Burr Truss.
Right. Thanks so much.
You're
Good to
welcome.
have you with us. Thank you for joining us for our Appalachia. We've enjoyed discussing the importance of Kentucky's covered bridges to the development of our area, and I hope all of you will share with me the need to maintain these bridges over the coming years as a reminder of their important place in our culture. Come back again next week as we take up another aspect of the Appalachian culture and heritage around us.